Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's that time of week again. The hashtag BC Poly Hot Stove with me. I'm Jordan Bateman, Director of Communications for the mighty ICBA, joined as always by...
I'm Maclean K, Editor-in-Chief of the equally mighty Orca. Jordan, hello.
Hello. Now, Maclean, we missed last week, but that was because you were still sobering up after the long-awaited Calgary Stampeders Grey Cup victory. So please take your victory lap now. We know you want to.
I have taken several victory laps, and I will continue taking them. I am the happiest man in Western Canada right now.
I would point out it is Wally Buono Day here in the city of Vancouver. The city of Vancouver, which frankly does nothing to help the BC Lions, but for some reason have declared it Wally Buono Day in a naked attempt to pander to the great man. But anyways, that's besides.
Hey, richly deserved. The man is a legend. When someone with the statue of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who spent a grand total of, 2 months with you, 20 years later is still calling you one of the foremost influencers on his life and career. I mean, obviously the man affected a lot of people.
Oh, no, I totally agree. Look, I'm a very pro-Wally, obviously a big BC Lions fan, but I'm anti the city of Vancouver and the way it treats their CFL franchise. I'm not a big fan of that. I should also note then, after your big Grey Cup celebration, you whisked the family away. You literally did what they do when they win championships. You went to Disneyland. I
did. I did a weekend stealth mission down to, of course, Disneyland in California, because West Coast, best coast. Yep. And it was Christmas in Disneyland. If you've never been, it's worth checking out.
Yeah,
Walt does a pretty good job.
How was it? Anything stand out?
I haven't been at Christmas there before. They just, the touch they have with everything, the level of detail, the way some of the rides have holiday themes and everything's all lit up at night and beautiful. Even if you're not a big ride guy, and I'm not, there's so much to see and do. It's a whirlwind. It's probably the best organized 10 acres or whatever it is on the face of the earth.
And then you had Elsa and Anna making it snow during the parades, no doubt.
They do, actually, and they have the snow, which regularly It regularly falls during moments. Depending on where you are in the park, either smells like gingerbread or pine.
Ooh, nice, very nice. How was the weather, by the way?
It was fantastic. T-shirt weather the whole time.
All right, that's good. Now, Christmas you mentioned, so I think that here at ICBA we are also busy celebrating Christmas. I'm just going to switch over to... This worked better in the dry run through here. What's going on here? Hang on. Where's my? Oh, there we go. Oh, no. There we go. This is good podcasting right here. There we go. I've lit the fire. We're all set, and I am on fire right now because it is time for the hot stove. And on the front burner, the number one political issue British Columbians should be thinking about. I'll give you mine. Are you ready?
I'm here.
The Massey Tunnel. Now, I've read many government reports in my life, too many government reports to count in my life. There's been nothing more terrifying in a government report that I've ever read than the terrible, what would happen to the Massey Tunnel in an earthquake. The City of Delta commissioned this report. It was graphic. It should have been rated R for keeping these poor children away from reading it. Essentially, they talk about how the tunnel would, cracks would start to form. It would break in half and start to maybe float down the river with people inside screaming. You may have a few seconds to escape, but likely you're doomed if you're in the tunnel for an earthquake. And yet, this is the very tunnel that, for some weird reason, Claire Trevina has made it her hill to die on. She is going to keep this tunnel. What the heck is going on over there?
Well, I think the NDP felt like they had to cancel at least one BC Liberal super project, and this was the one they felt like they could do with the least amount of political and economic cost. And they might have been wrong. There's no argument for not at least upgrading the tunnel, much less replacing it. You can argue about whether it should be a bridge and where the bridge should go, and that's fine. But as you say, this in a seismically active area, having a tunnel which even the most charitable description would be a death trap in the event of an earthquake, Look, you're almost at a loss for words. Clearly, something needs to be done. It's an issue of responsibility.
Yeah, yeah. Now they've done some sort of report that they refuse to release, probably because it doesn't say exactly what they want it to say. Although I do see Trevina has floated back-channeled to the Richmond Council that the 10-lane bridge is dead. And it sounds like Richmond's extrapolating from her comments, fix this tunnel and add another tunnel. Look, the problem for me is like lane capacity, right? So,
Yeah.
Right now during rush hour, you have 3 lanes going one way because you have that lane that switches sides. The problem with this then is, in order to have any kind of measurable effect on the congestion, you've got to go to at least 4 lanes. This is why the 4 lanes, and you want to have one that's HOV transit friendlier, which is why the Liberals said, let's do 5 lanes each way, make it like the Portman Bridge, where you have these various lanes earmarked for certain uses. Now, of course, the NDP don't want that. I'm not sure a 10-lane bridge is that much more expensive than an 8-lane bridge. But, my fear is they're just going to try to keep this existing tunnel, and at some point that piece of infrastructure is going to fail, and we'll be right back down to, one 4-lane tunnel, trying to struggle through that major choke point.
Well, and I mean, you've summed it up nicely. I mean, a lot of the issues that the people, leaders and politicians in the Lower Mainland are grappling with, that they're all sort of coming to roost here. And one of those is density and things like housing. And the sad fact is if the Lower Mainland is going to continue to grow, and it will, because people want to live there, and it's got a healthy, thriving economy, they can't all live in downtown Vancouver. A lot of them are going to live in places like Delta and Surrey and Tsawwassen, and they're going to need to get downtown every once in a while. And listen, you can build a SkyTrain down to Tsawwassen. People are still going to need to take their cars once in a while. They're going to need delivery trucks need to get through.
You got the port. You have the Port of Metro Vancouver there.
Exactly. So, there is no growth plan for the Lower Mainland that does not include at least a significant upgrade to get across the Fraser or underneath the Fraser, as the case may be. And so, I mean, not planning for it now for whatever reason, I mean, it's fine. Don't build the tunnel there exactly the way the BC Liberal government planned. Fair enough. But come up with something.
Yeah, and this is the problem. They're going to try to rag the puck on this as long as possible. And then no doubt right before the next election, they'll announce something in order to try to save Ravi Kalen's seat and some of these Surrey swing ridings. But yeah, it's frustrating for us. I mean, we had contractors who were already working on the Massey tunnel or the Massey Bridge project.
That's right.
One of the underreported things too is if you twin the tunnel, you actually have to realign part of the highway, which means you're actually taking more farmland away. And for people who say that farmland, every inch of farmland is precious, which is nonsense, it's not. But there are people who are religiously fervent about it. I don't understand how those same people can then favor twinning the tunnel and taking away more of that land. So it'll be interesting to see what the NDP do. But no doubt, don't worry about it. The NDP have their best.
People had the idea.
Yeah, the NDP have their best person on it, Claire Trevina. So what could possibly go wrong with that? What's on your front burner politics-wise these days, Maclean?
Well, you know what? I think it's an issue that British Columbians are very familiar with, but is increasingly going to be important as we get into the next federal election, and that's carbon tax. Putting a price on carbon. Gordon Campbell had his vision for the way it would work here in BC, and I think before anyone else in North America. And the federal Liberals under Justin Trudeau have attempted to do the same with a national climate plan. The problem is, increasingly, a lot of the provinces are not just needing to be convinced, but explicitly hostile to it. And I mean, and that includes Ontario, Canada's biggest province, also Manitoba, New Brunswick, and let's face it, probably Alberta next year. So, I mean, at a certain point, when you've got more than 50% of the country, both geographically and in population, opposing something the federal government wants to do, you have to wonder when there's a critical mass saying, whatever the merits of Trudeau's carbon tax plan, something's going to have to change. And again, we've had this debate here in British Columbia. It's going to be interesting to watch the NDP, I guess they've registered as interveners in the case in Ontario, saying that we in fact need to have a carbon tax. The angle they've taken is that if Ontario doesn't have one, it's that harms BC's competitiveness, which is not an argument they make when they talk about Canada having a carbon tax vis-a-vis the United States. So which is it?
Well, that's an interesting point because for years they've been claiming now, both sides of the House have been claiming that it doesn't really hurt our competitiveness and it actually enhances it because we're more environmentally friendly and therefore all of these socially responsible companies will want to locate here, tech companies and filming companies and whatnot, which of course is utter nonsense. That just isn't the way it works. I've been interested to watch a little bit, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert on international politics and certainly not French politics. But very interesting to see what's happening there with these riots. I mean, violence in the streets over gas tax increases. And today Macron backed down. And you wonder, yesterday we're reading about the bromance between Macron and Trudeau at the G20 and how they see eye to eye and everything. And these are the two young guys who are going to lead the world into this progressive future. And then, today Macron surrenders, much like the Simpsons say, cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Wasn't that what Homer called the? He basically does that on this issue. And now what? I mean, is Trudeau going to have the only national carbon tax in the world? Number one, is that worth it? Number two, for BC, let's say the Trudeau carbon tax falls apart. We've been talking for years and years about how we're a climate leader. The word leader implies that you have a follower. We still have no one following us when it comes to carbon taxes. Trudeau's talking about it, but nothing is in place. So
That's true.
You do what? Washington State voted theirs down 3 times. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And that's Washington State, which is about as left gets in the state. So there is problems with this regime. And, all the nice Wall Street Journal editorials from 10 years ago don't seem to, they seem further and further away given the state of the world.
Well, and I think it goes to show that it doesn't matter if the commentariat and the political elite, and I hate using that term, but it's if all the editorial writers agree with you, that's fine, but you still have to convince a critical mass of people to go along with your plan. And it doesn't matter what we're talking about, carbon tax or anything else. If people are willing to riot in the streets to oppose it, I mean, it's we had that problem with the Northern Gateway here in BC, and still with the Kinder Morgan to a similar extent. And that is basically that if people are willing to go to these lengths to stop something, at the very least, you could admit that maybe we need to do a better job selling them on the necessity of it. And that seems to be increasingly happening with the carbon tax, not just in Canada, but around the world. People are not convinced that it is anything other than just another tax. I think no one has had more success pitching it as something other than that than Gordon Campbell.
Yeah, well, exactly. Now he's a special advisor to Doug Ford, but we don't see a lot of that carbon tax ideology pouring out of Ontario these days. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. We should note there is another $1.50 carbon tax per liter carbon tax increase on the books for April 1st of next year. That will tie into a 2 cent per liter TransLink gas tax increase, which means gas prices will go up by 3.5 cents from March 31st to April 1st. Put in your calendar. Make sure you fill up on the 31st, not the 1st. And, this is probably just the first step. Tomorrow, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, tomorrow they're releasing their climate plan. BC government is, and you can bet that carbon tax hikes will be a major feature for a party who famously once ran on an Axe That Tax campaign, but that seems to be a long time ago now. Well,
I mean, and they have admitted that was a mistake, but that's true. It's not that long ago that was the central issue of an election campaign, 2009. Mm-hmm. So, and it's the leader is the current finance minister. So, I mean, these are fair comparisons and memories to bring back up.
Yes, and I do wonder if the carbon tax, if Prop Rep passed, I would bet on the carbon tax being the issue that the BC Conservatives rally around.
That is a very fair point.
Election. That would be their hue and cry, I'm sure. All right, let's go from there. What's on the back burner, the second most important issue or story, and Maclean, this ties into it, LNG.
Yeah, I mean, you thought that you'd had enough LNG news with, you can say it along with us, folks, the largest private sector investment in Canadian history, but it looks like there might be a sequel. The Woodfibre LNG, which is a proposed project near Squamish, has received, jumped over a major hurdle this week when they got the Squamish Nation, which at one point was fairly hostile and opposed to this, to agree to approve the project, but also to a benefits agreement, which is $1 billion thereabouts. I mean, this is substantial. To be fair, it's worth noting that apparently the vote within the Squamish Nation was close, but voted to approve they did, and this raises a number of issues, one of which is if this does happen, that'll be 2 LNG facilities for BC, getting closer and closer to what Christy Clark envisioned back in 2013. But also, the NDP were fairly, and we're going to talk more about this in the climate plan, but they were fairly clear when LNG Canada went forward that they had room in their climate plan for 1 LNG project and 1 only. It's going to be very difficult to find a way to reject wood fiber LNG if the local First Nation has already signed on, because that's one of the main objections they have. So some interesting decisions and some tricky navigation ahead for possibly for John Horgan and George Heyman, his environment minister.
Well, wood fiber also provides probably a more copyable, for lack of a better term, an easier copied template for other LNG plants. Look, the LNG can is $40 billion. I mean, that is an outrageous amount of money that only the largest energy companies could possibly afford, and frankly, it took a partnership of 3 of them to get there. Wood fiber is more in the range of $5 to $10 billion. I think it's 7.5 for some reason. You know, only
it's a boutique LNG project.
It's like a craft LNG project, right? Like, let the Budweiser guys up there do their thing. We're going to have our craft LNG here in Squamish. But, you know, that is probably a more replicable model for a lot of other LNG things. Now, they've gone above and beyond. They're going to use, I believe they're using electricity to make sure that their LNG cooling is as environmentally friendly as possible. But like you say, there are emissions from all of this. And certainly the Greasy Greens have made a big deal about wanting to count all the upstream emissions of natural gas, in which case, you know, look, there's only a few ways to get it out of the ground, and, you know, all of those ways do result in some emissions happening. So you're right, it will be very interesting to see tomorrow. My bet is wood fiber doesn't get mentioned unless the media bring it up. And, you know, kudos, first of all, to Squamish First Nation, first of all, for being willing to get to yes. Kudos to wood fiber for making a deal that they feel they can live with and that they can work with the First Nation on. And, you know, you can't sneeze at $1.1 billion. That's a transformational economic development project for that region and for those Indigenous peoples.
Well, and the Squamish Nation, I mean, not only did they, to borrow a phrase, get to yes, but they struck the best imaginable deal. It's hard to imagine a project of that size having a $1 billion benefit agreement. But that's what Squamish Nation managed to negotiate. And, you know, they're tough negotiators. My hat's off to them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, my second story, my back burner issue, is federal spending. And Maclean, I wrote about this. And in my timeline, 2 things popped up almost exactly the same time. Number 1, they found a giant cave in Wells Grape Provincial Park. And number 2, Justin Trudeau flippantly gave $50 million to a charity fronted by Trevor Noah, who, if you're a normal human being, you've never heard of, but he was the replacement for Jon Stewart on The Daily Show.
If you're woke and lit, you'll know that.
Yeah, if you're woke and or lit, you will know that. But nonetheless, $50 million when veterans can't get disability is sort of frustrating to folks like me. Anyways, this led me to write a piece for the Orca.ca in which I propose that if Trudeau wins the next election after running up $100 billion in deficits in this term, that I may have to move into that giant cave in Wells Grey Park. And all of you other fiscal conservatives out there are welcome to join me. We'll at least, at the very least, we'll bury our wallets there and try to hide them from Trudeau. But yeah, look, this is getting a lot of coverage, especially back east. I think the Toronto Sun called him the Twitter twit. You know, this is everything that drives people crazy about Justin Trudeau encapsulated in one tweet. The kind of flippancy with which he uses, spends tax dollars. The fact that these tax dollars, went to an international charity, which, look, it does amazing work. It's educating women and girls around the world in places where they don't have those same opportunities that my daughters have. That is extremely noble work. However, this is a charity that has fewer Twitter followers than I do, which does make me wonder about the long-term sustainability. Not that Twitter followers is the number one metric, but if you're giving an organization $50 million, you feel like maybe they're a little more built out than 4,000 Twitter followers. I don't know. It's all these different things, and it just is. It's really about that Trudeau celebrity sucking kneecaps, trying to, make sure that, he's, in with the hip, woke, lit crowd. And yeah, yuck.
Well, I mean, one of two things happened there. Either he, and apparently this is not what happened, but it is conceivable at least that he just made that commitment independently in an off-the-cuff tweet, which is indefensible. But what apparently is this was long planned, and they just decided to announce it that way, which is also not great because it gives the impression that he's committing $50 million in tweets. And I mean, there's a pretty clear example of a national leader just to the south of us who makes up policy on Twitter on the fly. And so at the very least, you'd think that somebody around Justin Trudeau would say, look, the optics of this are not great. Can we at least have a release or something, or make it clear that this was well considered and planned beforehand?
Yeah, it's a backgrounder. It's called a backgrounder. It's not hard for your giant comm shop to put out, that's for sure. Anyways, join me at the cave, fall 2019. All right. Is it fall or is it spring 2019, the election?
It is spring, fall. I think, isn't it? You'd think we would just know this off the tops of our heads.
No, I think province is spring. I think the feds were fall. And then they've moved the province to fall.
That's right.
Okay.
You're right.
All right, good. Politicians or leaders who are having good weeks, who is heating up? Maclean, an auditor general heating up? I can hardly believe it.
Well, you said politicians or leaders. I tend to think of the auditor generals in BC have tended to play an outsized role in terms of their prominence. And this week, BC's auditor general, Carol Bellringer, has said that she was going to have problems signing off on the legislature's, I guess, $80 million tab if she didn't know what the hell is happening with its two senior-most officials. Again, apparently, much like the two men themselves, Craig James and Gary Lenz, she doesn't know what is being investigated. They have not been charged with anything. If it's money related, which at the very least is a reasonable assumption, she'd want to know that before signing off on the legislature's expenses. And so it's nice to see somebody at the very least saying to all this ridiculousness that's happened here in the last couple of weeks, this isn't good enough. Okay, and if I'm going to sign off on what's happening here, I have to know what's going on. And for that, my hat's off to her.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I know the Legislative Administration and Management Committee is meeting today or tomorrow? Today? Wednesday?
I believe it's today and tomorrow.
Okay, and I used to love this committee. It was like only Rob Shaw would ever go to it back when he was just cutting his teeth. But it was always great for me at the Taxpayers Federation because they were always doing something stupid. And Shaw would report it, and then I would jump on top of it. It was fantastic. I miss the Lamsey, as they call it. You're right. Good on her for not wanting to sign off until she has some sort of hint. But it does tell you that whatever weird thing that Daryl Plekas thinks he's seen, whatever Sasquatch is hiding in the woods, wasn't visible enough for the Auditor General and her team to pick it up, which is...
Well, she hasn't had a 7-month private investigation into it, has she?
Yeah. Yes, Brett Mullen working hard on that. Okay, mine is, my hot folks are the team first past the post. Look, we're coming down to the wire. This campaign should be over, but the NDP decided to extend it a week. That's fine. They've rigged every other part of this, stacked the deck of this process. Why wouldn't they add another week to try to squeeze out every possible prop rep vote in the province? However, we are at 39% turnout today. So he's going to settle in around 40, it's 42-ish, 43 maybe.
Which I will remind you was my predicted turnout.
Well, I don't know if we counted if they extended it. I think we should be forced to live with the 37.
But we also didn't count on a mail strike.
The mail, come on. The mail strike was like... It's a convenient excuse. There's always a mail strike during these things. There's one during HST. It's just
that is true. We have uncommon bad luck there.
It's a tradition in BC. It's almost like a mail-in ballot is some sort of pressure point that CUPW would want to use on the
never.
Public, but never. That can't be right. Anyways, I just want to commend Team First Past the Post. Look, they've run a tough campaign. A campaign in which all of the fancy buzzwords are on the other side, all of the all of the rule makers are on the other side, deliberately setting out rules that favor prop rep. And they have been plucky. They've worked hard to earn media. They've tried to stretch that $500,000 they got from the government for their campaign as far as it can go. I'll remind you, You never saw a Green Party commercial in the last provincial election. They spent $1.1 million. These guys had to do this campaign on 500 grand plus an extra 200 if they were able to raise it. So we really was stacked against them, and they fought hard. So my commendations to Bill Thielman, to Suzanne Anton, to Bob Plekas, and to Kent Verge and to their team over there. Fighting the good fight for first past the post. And if I'm reading ballot returns properly, I think first past the post is going to edge out Prop Rep. It's going to be close, but it seems to me the turnout in the BC Liberal ridings is higher than the turnout in the NDP ridings. The Greens are probably the highest turnout of all, but they only have 3 ridings, so it's almost inconsequential to the overall vote count. So, when I look at Surrey, for example, the BC Liberal ridings, some of them are almost double what the NDP ridings are as far as turnout goes. That would seem to indicate to me that the BC Liberal Party, who should also be commended for their work on this, has gotten their vote out.
It's going to be interesting for some of the number crunchers. I'm thinking of the Justin McElroys and the Mike McDonalds to do a really deep dive into, who voted and where and how. Because I'm fascinated to know. Because you're right, the regional disparities in turnout have been really jarring, it's hard to discern reasons why, other than, as you say, it seems from the surface that places where you'd think that voting no would be more prevalent, they seem to be turning out more. But other than that, we can't say right now.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some people have tried to look at demographics, quote unquote younger ridings, and how are they voting compared to the older ridings. That's a little bit tougher because every riding has older people, and it's not necessarily that the young ones have come out. But we'll see. I mean, it's up in the air. It could go either way. No one's going to be surprised by any result unless it's a blowout for one side or the other. That's the only surprise that I think would catch
I don't. That would be a surprise. I don't think that's in the cards. I think at this point, 55-45 either way would be on the sort of extreme outer margins that you could reasonably suppose. I think we're looking at something like a 53-47.
Yeah, I think it might even be closer than that.
I agree.
Like, 51.8 to 48.2 or whatever. So it's gonna be tight.
Yeah.
All right, that was what's hot. What's cooling off? Who's cooling off? I will throw in John Horgan, Andrew Weaver, and George Heyman. Tomorrow they're releasing the NDP government's climate plan. You can bet this will be full of red tape, regulatory overreach, probably massive tax increases. This is not going to be great for for anyone in British Columbia. Also, that we can deal with what 1/10 of the world's carbon emissions. But it'll make these guys. It'll keep the Green Party in the boat for the NDP, which I guess is the real end goal of the climate plan.
My cooling off politician is the BC. We talked a little bit about the transportation file, Minister Claire Trevena, but this is specifically to do with ride hailing, which they have succeeded in making absolutely nobody happy with this. It's a weird sort of mishmash of rules and regulations, which seem to be designed to at least being able to say they brought in ride hailing, but not bringing it in any form which exists anywhere else on the planet. Specifically having, a cap on the number of drivers at any one moment, which sort of defeats the purpose of having it on demand. I mean, it is, you don't need to know a lot about the way people behave to know that probably New Year's Eve, the weekend of Halloween, there's going to be a lot more demand for transportation options than there are, 4 a.m. on a random Sunday. But apparently they will not have the ability to have more people out there driving at any given time. And some of the reasons have been hard to swallow. One of the ones that got the most attention was, they wanted to avoid the kind of chaos and gridlock that have afflicted cities like New York, which, I'm sorry, just isn't true.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to put that. And
I've used an Uber in New York. It was not congested. And it was actually surprisingly okay.
And Mike Smith had a piece this week saying, they wanted to avoid the chaos of ride hailing. Well, look at Toronto. Yeah. Toronto is in many ways a pretty fair comparison to Vancouver, and yet their experience with ride hailing has been on the whole fairly smooth. And to suggest that it has been sort of, Mad Max everywhere else in the world, again, simply isn't true. And I mean, to be fair, this was a difficult file in BC specifically because of Surrey. Let's be honest. And so there was a tightrope to walk for this government, and there's a reason the previous BC Liberal government sort of decided to punt on it. But I would not call that what has happened here a success.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the Surrey thing, because as the Orca's resident Surrey political watcher, let me fill folks in a little bit on the dynamic in Surrey. So at first it was very much the taxi industry controlling a number of votes in Surrey. And look, there's a number of South Asian drivers. Most of them live in Surrey, specifically the Newton area. And they were very capable at mustering votes. The problem is that has withered away. And you have the individual drivers' families who are still very much invested in this. But the general consensus among the public, even in the South Asian community, is that, look, it's happening everywhere else. It should happen here. And if you have an elderly a relative, whether from wherever cultural or ethnic background you're from, you want them to be able to get a ride properly. Mm-hmm. And that is one of these things that Uber can do. Now, where the battleground is now is actually, oddly enough, among TransLink bus drivers. So TransLink's gone on a major bus buying spree. Each of those buses have to come with 2 or 3 drivers in order to man it over the time. And there have been a number of South Asian drivers hired. It's been a big employment drive within that community, which is great. The question there is this good for transit or bad for transit having Uber? Studies show it's actually good for transit. It's what's called the last mile. So you can't possibly have a bus stop near everyone's house, but you can have these kind of bus stops all over the place, and then you can have people who Uber from that bus stop home, or from King George SkyTrain home. There's all these different little the last mile, it's called. There's all these different ways to incorporate it into the system, and it actually makes people more comfortable with the idea of getting rid of a car altogether. And if you get rid of your car altogether, or you hardly ever use it, then of course you use transit more and more involved. So it's really changed in Surrey. In fact, I would say that there is a lot of anger that the NDP are not bringing it in, that they're kind of kowtowing. The other thing about Surrey South Asian politics to remember is that they're not monolithic.
No, by no means.
There's often 10 or 12 different factions kind of at once, and your job as a political party is to try to capture 7 or 8 of those 12 factions, realizing that there will always be factions opposed to the other ones, because there's always that jockeying for power and position. So all that to say, NDP, let's show a little bit of pluck, let's show a little bit of courage here, and let's actually get real ride sharing into the region, into British Columbia. It's long past time. And frankly, Claire Trevina, better hope there isn't a cabinet shuffle looming, because it seems to me she'd be the first one out the door.
Well, I mean, it's you mentioned taking an Uber in New York. As we were mentioning, I just flew in and out of LAX, and they have specific areas there devoted for ride-hailing apps, and there's other areas for taxis, and it all just sort of seems to work. And it's just not that you don't see, even in an airport the size of LAX, the kind of lineups for people to get out of there like you do in Vancouver, which is, I mean, it is an embarrassment. Yeah. And it's you learn very quickly, if you do have to fly in and out of YVR, that you either arrange your own transportation or make sure you can SkyTrain or something, because God help you if you're waiting for a taxi there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, well, Maclean, we'll do this again next week.
We will indeed.
Checking the calendar, yeah. Maybe next week we'll do a naughty and nice list.
Oh, I like that idea. I'm already drawing it up.
All right, I'm already thinking. It's always harder to find the nice ones than the naughty ones, but you're nicer than I am, so maybe maybe it is possible.
Well, that's true.
And for those of you watching, theorca.ca, that's the website where all of our good stuff can be found. At theorcabc on Twitter, facebook.com/theorcabc. If you're looking for our YouTube channel, bit.ly/theorcatv. And you can find all of the BC Poly hot stoves along with all of the off the cuffs. He's got a great interview today with Anne McMullen ahead of the Vancouver City Council looking at rental caps. looking at rental increase caps, which will absolutely devastate the private rental business. You won't see any buildings being built for rental accommodation if this goes through. He's got a great interview with Anne McMullen from the Urban Development Institute on precisely that topic. And not to scoop anything, but Friday, I think, is the big Gwyn Morgan interview.
Yes, it is. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, in which Gwyn talks about the price cut or the production cut in Alberta, how important that is for the oil and gas industry as a whole. So lots to see on the Orca.ca. What are you working on, Maclean? What's anything exciting?
Well, I'm editing Bob Price and Joni Vance's pieces for this week. Ada Slavinsky and her usual look at small business across BC. So a lot of good stuff coming. But it's this coming week, Friday, we have our exclusive year-end interview with Green Party leader Andrew Weaver, who was good enough to agree to one. And the following week with BC Liberal leader and opposition leader Andrew Wilkinson. And we're still working on the Premier. Our first answer was no, but we don't give up at the Orca.
We are efforting the Premier. Who knows what could happen? The good doctor, Andrew Weaver, coming up soon. And on Monday, for me, I'm betting I'll end up writing about the climate.
I suspect that is likely.
And we need to remember, there's also a national climate strategy that if you actually look through, your skin would crawl with the kind of government overreach that the Trudeau government wants to put on us. But I'll save that for Monday. For all of us at the Orca, we will see you again next week. And take care, everyone.
And in the meantime, happy holidays.